Hi folks, welcome to your last video for Unit 1 in American Government. And today we are going to be talking about federalism. So this is one of our principles of government, but we are going to kind of dig a little bit deeper into what federalism actually is and what it looks like. So your learning objectives for this video are to, one, explain the principle of federalism. So tell me what the definition is, and then two, list examples of what are called expressed, reserved, and concurrent powers. So you'll answer those two videos at the end. So first things first, what is federalism? Federalism is also known as levels of government, how power is distributed. So when we look at federalism in our country, power and responsibility are shared between local, state, and federal governments, right? We have the national government, but each state also has its own government as well. And so do the cities and towns, for example, in the states. So federalism looks at the relationship between those levels of government. So how is power actually divided and shared in this system? So we're going to start big and then work our way down. So the national government has what we call expressed or enumerated powers and implied powers. So you're going to want to remember those vocab terms. Okay, these powers, are powers that are given to the national government because they are either stated in the Constitution, like you can actually find them word for word in the Constitution, or they are assumed to exist. And that's where we get the implied powers from, right? It's kind of, you have to read in between the lines, but the power is still there. Also, these powers could also be necessary for the government to fulfill its responsibilities. Again, that is both expressed enumerated powers or implied powers. Examples of these national expressed and implied powers are going to be to declare war, right? Only the national government can declare war. Only the national government can conduct foreign affairs between the United States and other countries. States cannot do that. We tried that under the Articles of Confederation, and that didn't go very well. Another example is that the national government can coin money. They are the only ones that can do that. So we have U.S. currency rather than state currencies. Now, states also have powers in a federal system, and these are called reserved powers. And these reserved powers are powers specifically left to the states. And this is really done through the 10th Amendment. You guys saw this when we were working on the Bill of Rights. Examples of these reserved powers: driving laws, that's a big one. So driving laws, things like speed limits, the types of programs that you have to go through to get your license, those all vary from state to state. Okay, and that is an example of a reserved power. Marriage licenses. Okay, I think I've mentioned this as an example, but the documents that are given to citizens of each state are different, right? The Ohio license looks different from Indiana, looks different from Texas, for example. My marriage license, I got married in Kentucky, so I have a Kentucky-specific marriage license because I got married in that state. Education is also an example of a reserved power. So the states are the ones that are responsible for education, not the federal government. So those are reserved powers. Now, there are some powers that both the national and state governments share, and these are called concurrent powers. They happen concurrently or at the same time. That's what that means. So, like I said, these are powers that both the national and the state governments share or have the ability to do. The best example of this is the ability to tax. Both the national government, right, you pay federal taxes. You also pay state taxes. And depending on where you work, you might also pay City of Cincinnati taxes. So all of the governments, no matter how you divide up the power, have the ability to collect taxes from citizens. Now, when we look at powers under federalism, a really good example or visual that I like to give you guys is a Venn diagram. Because we live both under the national and state governments. So when you think about a Venn diagram, right, you've got the power or the characteristics on one side that are exclusive to that one, and then on the other, and then where the circles overlap, right, that's what they have in common. So you can think of that like our expressed, reserved, and concurrent powers. Over here, you've got your national powers, those expressed and implied powers of the national government. On the other side, you have powers of the states, those reserved powers. And then in the middle, where the powers overlap, where the circles overlap, you have your concurrent powers, powers that are given to both the national and the state governments. Now, there are some pros and cons that come with federalism. Meaning positives and negatives. So pro-wise, positive-wise, federalism actually allows you to access your government faster than if we just had a national government, for instance, right? Imagine you have a pothole on your street, and imagine how difficult it might be if you had to ask President Trump to get your pothole fixed, right? That's not his job. He's focusing at the national level. So what you would do would go to your local government, or depending on the issue, maybe the state government. Okay, so you are able to more easily access the government through federalism. Federalism also allows problems locally to be solved locally. Like I just said, you don't have to wait for the national government to come in and add a stop sign to the end of your street, right? That can happen locally. So it streamlines the process. And you guys are probably wondering why this is on here. Federalism is actually really great for experiments. And one of the ones that we have going on right now is legalizing marijuana. So obviously, marijuana is an illegal substance according to federal law. However, what the federal government is allowing states to do are make regulations on recreational and medicinal use. And what they're doing is they're kind of stepping back and seeing what problems arise, what works about those particular laws, and they're really seeing how everything plays out to eventually, maybe someday, it becoming a federal law. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, federalism does have some negatives or some cons to it. Because states can make their own laws, they have their own powers, they're responsible for their own education systems. States have different levels of service. So the education that you get in one state, for example, is different than another. Another thing is like welfare and public services, how you go about qualifying for like unemployment or food stamps for that particular state is different. So just because one state has a particular program doesn't mean it will be in all of the states. That leads to some inequality and some inconsistency. Number two, local interest can counteract national interest. And I think one of the best examples of this is going to be kind of the fight that we've seen recently over, do we tear down Confederate monuments in southern states, right? Confederate monuments being from the Civil War, maybe recognizing generals of the Civil War. And the Civil War is really, fought over slavery. So are those national monuments something that we should keep up or tear down? A lot of interest locally in the South, where a lot of the Civil War took place, wants to keep those up. Whereas nationally, we're seeing a movement to tear those down. So you do have some tension there. And then another negative of federalism is there's also often the fight over who is responsible. So, the national government might pass the buck to state governments for certain projects. One of the examples is the Brent Spence Bridge. That is one of the bridges that takes you from Ohio into Kentucky. And what you see happen is there's a fight over who is responsible for fixing things like that when it breaks, right? So the bridge connects Ohio to another state, but which state is responsible for funding that project? Technically, Kentucky owns the Ohio River, if you didn't know, but Ohio doesn't want to pay for the Brent Spence Bridge, and neither does Kentucky. So the argument becomes who's responsible for actually getting that fixed, right? All right, so remember your learning objectives were to 1, explain the principle of federalism, and 2, list examples of expressed or national powers, reserved or state powers, and concurrent or powers that both the national and state governments share. So pause the video if you need to, go back, fill in any blanks, and then answer these questions at the end of the video, and I will talk to you guys in class. See you later.